The glint of steel caught the afternoon sun as Lillian Harper stared down the barrels of 3 revolvers, her back pressed against the weathered wall of the abandoned mining shed. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but her green eyes remained defiant, even as dust swirled around the 4 figures in the clearing. Well, what do we have here? The tallest of the 3 men grinned, revealing tobacco-stained teeth beneath his unkempt mustache. A pretty little thing all alone in Rattlesnake Gulch. Ain't that a stroke of luck, boys? Lillian's hand inched toward the small derringer hidden in the folds of her skirt. I suggest you gentlemen move along, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. I have no quarrel with you. The second man, wearing a filthy red bandana around his neck, spat on the ground. That fancy stagecoach that rolled through here yesterday says different. Word is you're carrying something valuable, miss. I'm carrying nothing but my dignity, Lillian replied, and I intend to keep it. The third man, the shortest but meanest looking of the bunch, stepped closer. We can do this easy or hard, lady, your choice. Lillian's fingers closed around her small pistol. I choose neither. The thunder of approaching hoofbeats made all 4 heads turn. A cloud of dust preceded the rider who emerged from the rocky path, tall in the saddle, broad-shouldered, with a weathered Stetson pulled low over his eyes. The newcomer reined his horse to a stop, assessing the situation with a calm gaze. His duster billowed slightly in the hot Arizona breeze of 1878, and the rifle resting across his saddle looked well used. 3 against 1, he said, his voice deep and measured. Hardly seems sporting. The tall outlaw turned, his gun still trained on Lillian. This ain't your business, stranger. Ride on if you value that handsome face of yours. The rider dismounted with fluid grace, his spurs jangling against the rocky ground. I'm making it my business. His eyes, blue as the desert sky, flicked to Lillian. You all right, madam? Before she could answer, Lillian yanked her derringer free and aimed it at the nearest outlaw. I can fight, she declared, cocking the small weapon. A hint of a smile touched the corner of the cowboy's mouth. I don't doubt it, madam, he said, but I'd rather see you smile than bleed today. He turned his attention back to the 3 men. I'm giving you one chance to walk away. The outlaws exchanged glances, measuring the calm confidence of the cowboy against their own bravado. Lillian noticed the way his hand hovered near his holster, not nervous, just ready. The leader scoffed. 3 guns beat 1, no matter how fast you think you are. True, the cowboy nodded. But you've forgotten to count the lady's gun and the 2 rifles aimed at your backs from those rocks yonder. All eyes shifted to the rocky outcropping where, indeed, the barrels of 2 rifles gleamed in the sunlight. The outlaw's confidence visibly faltered. Now, continued the cowboy, I suggest you gentlemen reconsider your afternoon plans. A tense moment passed before the leader lowered his weapon slightly. This ain't worth dying over, he muttered to his companions. Not today. They backed away slowly, mounted their horses, and rode off in a cloud of dust, casting dark glances over their shoulders as they disappeared into the rocky landscape. Only when they were gone did Lillian notice she had been holding her breath. She exhaled shakily, lowering her derringer. Thank you, she said, straightening her spine. Though I would have managed, the cowboy's eyes crinkled at the corners. I believe you would have, madam, he tipped his hat. Isaac Blackwood at your service. Lillian Harper, she replied, tucking away her small pistol. And your friends with the rifles? Isaac chuckled. Don't exist, madam, old bluffing trick. Despite herself, Lillian felt the corner of her mouth twitch upward. Clever, Mr. Blackwood. Just Isaac, please. He glanced around. May I ask what brings a lady like yourself to this God-forsaken stretch of territory? These parts aren't known for their hospitality. Lillian brushed dust from her skirt, considering how much to reveal. I'm headed to Promise Creek. Family matters. Promise Creek. Isaac raised an eyebrow. That's still 30 miles through rough country. You planning to walk there? Lillian's shoulders sagged slightly. My horse went lame yesterday. I was hoping to find assistance at the trading post that's supposed to be nearby. Reynolds Place. Isaac shook his head. Closed down last winter after the Apache raids. Nearest outpost now is Copper Springs, 15 miles east. Disappointment washed over Lillian's face before she could mask it. I see. Isaac studied her for a moment, then reached a decision. I'm headed toward Promise Creek myself. I'd be honored to escort you, Miss Harper. Lillian regarded him with suspicion born of hard experience. Why would you do that, Mr. Blackwood? You don't know me. Isaac, he corrected gently, and out here helping folks isn't kindness, it's survival. Next time I might be the one needing assistance. He gestured to his horse, a sturdy Palomino. Samson here is strong enough to carry us both until we can find you a mount in Copper Springs. Lillian weighed her options. Trust didn't come easily to her, especially trust in men. But the alternative was bleak alone in dangerous territory with minimal supplies and sunset approaching. Very well, she finally said. But I insist on paying you for your trouble once we reach Promise Creek. Isaac's smile was warm and genuine. We can discuss that when we get there. For now, let's find shelter before nightfall. There's a decent camping spot about 2 hours' ride from here. He helped Lillian mount before swinging up behind her. She sat stiffly, uncomfortable with the proximity to this stranger. You can relax, Miss Harper, Isaac said as they set off. I promise I'm a gentleman. Forgive me if I reserve judgment on that, Lillian replied crisply. Isaac chuckled. Fair enough, I'll earn your trust the old-fashioned way by deserving it. As they rode away from the mining shed, Lillian couldn't help but notice the steadiness of his presence behind her, solid yet respectful. Despite her best efforts to maintain her guard, she found herself relaxing incrementally as they made their way across the rugged landscape, the setting sun painting the Arizona desert in strokes of gold and crimson. The first night under the stars was strained with awkward silences. Isaac built a small fire in a sheltered hollow, far enough from the trail to avoid unwanted visitors but close enough to water for their needs. He offered Lillian his bedroll and fashioned a makeshift one for himself on the opposite side of the fire. So, Miss Harper, Isaac said as he handed her a tin cup of coffee, what awaits you in Promise Creek? Lillian cradled the cup in her hands, savoring the warmth. My brother's ranch. He died last month, influenza. The words were matter of fact, but Isaac caught the slight tremor in her voice. I'm sorry for your loss, he said quietly. She nodded, eyes fixed on the dancing flames. Lucas was all the family I had left. He wrote to me last year about his success, a small ranch, good land. Said there was always a place for me if I wanted it. She took a sip of coffee. I was too proud then, too determined to make my own way in St. Louis. Now his lawyer says I've inherited everything, but I must claim it in person. Isaac prodded the fire with a stick. Ranching's hard work, especially for someone alone. I'm not afraid of hard work, Mr. Blackwood. Isaac, he reminded her with a small smile. And I never suggested you were, just stating facts. Most ranches out here need at least 3 good hands to run properly. Lillian's chin lifted. Then I shall hire hands. With what money, if I may ask? Ranch hands expect pay, and ranches don't turn profits immediately. Her silence told him everything. I could help you, Isaac offered, at least to get started. I know ranching. Lillian's green eyes narrowed suspiciously. And what would you want in return, Mr. Blackwood? Isaac leaned back, considering her from beneath the brim of his hat. Room and board until the first cattle drive, a fair share of the profits after, nothing more. Why would you help a stranger? Isaac was quiet for a long moment. Because 8 years ago, someone helped me when I had nothing. Seems right to pass that on. He set his coffee cup down. Think about it. You don't need to decide tonight. Lillian nodded, though her expression remained guarded. I'll consider it. As the fire died down to embers, Lillian lay awake, listening to the night sounds of the desert and the steady breathing of the man across the fire. She couldn't deny that his offer made practical sense, but trusting a man she'd just met with her future went against every instinct she'd developed in her 24 years. Yet something about Isaac Blackwood seemed different from the opportunistic men she'd encountered before. There was a steadiness to him, a quiet confidence that didn't demand attention or recognition. The following morning broke clear and hot. Isaac was already awake, brewing fresh coffee when Lillian emerged from her bedroll. "Sleep well?" he asked, offering her a cup. "Well enough," she replied, accepting it gratefully. "And you?" "I've slept on worse ground," he said with a shrug. "We should reach Copper Springs by midday if we make good time." They rode in companionable silence for most of the morning, the rhythm of the horses' hooves and the vast landscape encouraging contemplation rather than conversation. Occasionally, Isaac would point out landmarks or tracks in the dust, sharing knowledge of the territory that spoke of years spent in these lands. "How did you learn so much about this area?" Lillian finally asked as they crossed a dry creek bed. Isaac adjusted his hold on the reins. "Spent 5 years scouting for the cavalry after the war. Learned every water hole, trail, and hideout between here and the Colorado River." "You fought in the war," Union sighed. "Enlisted at 16, though I told them I was 18. His voice had a distant quality, as if he were looking back through a long tunnel of years. "Saw things no boy should see. Came west afterward, looking for open spaces and fewer ghosts." Lillian nodded, understanding more than she let on. "Did you find what you were looking for?" Isaac was quiet for a moment. "Some days I think so, other days." He trailed off, then seemed to shake himself from his reverie. "How about you, Miss Harper? What brought you to St. Louis?" "I was a teacher," she said. "After our parents died, Lucas went west to seek his fortune and I took a position at a girls' school. It was respectable work. But not fulfilling," Isaac guessed. Lillian glanced over her shoulder at him, surprised by his perception. "No," she admitted, "not entirely. There were too many rules, too much emphasis on turning spirited girls into proper ladies with no thoughts in their heads beyond securing suitable husbands." Isaac chuckled. "I gather you didn't agree with that philosophy." "I believe women are capable of far more than society gives us credit for," Lillian said firmly. "My mother taught me to ride, shoot, and think for myself alongside my feminine accomplishments. She always said a woman should be prepared to stand on her own if necessary." "Your mother sounds like she was ahead of her time." "She was," Lillian said softly. "I miss her wisdom daily." The conversation lapsed into comfortable silence until the ramshackle buildings of Copper Springs appeared on the horizon just after noon. The small settlement consisted of little more than a general store, a saloon, a blacksmith, and a handful of weathered buildings that had seen better days. Isaac helped Lillian dismount outside the general store. "Let's see about finding you a horse," he said. "And perhaps some supplies for the remainder of our journey." The proprietor of the general store, a portly man named Howard Jenkins, greeted them with the eager attention of someone who saw few customers. "Passing through?" he asked, eyeing Lillian with undisguised curiosity. "Yes," Isaac answered. "The lady needs a horse. Anyone in town selling?" Jenkins stroked his beard thoughtfully. "Old man Parsons might part with that bay mare of his for the right price. His arthritis is acting up something fierce these days, can't ride much anymore." "And where might we find Mr. Parsons?" Lillian inquired. "Likely at the saloon this time of day," Jenkins replied. "I can send my boy to fetch him if you'd like." "That would be most helpful," Lillian said with a grateful smile. While they waited, they purchased supplies: coffee, beans, jerky, and ammunition. Lillian noted with approval that Isaac selected practical items without unnecessary extravagance, confirming her growing impression of him as a man of sensible habits. Old man Parsons arrived 30 minutes later, a wizened figure with a pronounced limp but sharp eyes that missed nothing. After some negotiation, during which Lillian demonstrated her knowledge of horseflesh to the old man's surprise and evident approval, they agreed on a price for the bay mare, a sturdy animal with good lines and a gentle disposition. "She's called Penny," Parsons told Lillian as he handed over the reins. "Treat her right and she'll do the same for you." "I will," Lillian promised, stroking the mare's velvety nose. With Lillian now mounted on her own horse, They left Copper Springs behind, aiming to cover several more miles before making camp. The terrain gradually changed as they rode, the barren desert giving way to grasslands dotted with mesquite and stunted juniper. "This is better cattle country," Isaac observed as they rode side by side. "Your brother chose well if his land is anything like this." Lillian felt a surge of hope. The lawyer's letter mentioned good grazing land with year-round water access. "That's worth its weight in gold out here," Isaac nodded approvingly. "Water rights are everything." They made camp that evening in a small hollow sheltered by cottonwoods, a luxury after the previous night's sparse accommodations. A small spring provided fresh water, and Isaac managed to catch 2 rabbits which he skillfully prepared for their supper. As they sat by the fire, Lillian found herself studying Isaac's profile, the strong line of his jaw softened by firelight, his eyes reflecting the dancing flames. There was something compelling about his quiet competence, the way he moved through the world with purpose but without aggression. "You're staring, Miss Harper," Isaac said without looking up from the stick he was whittling. Lillian felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I was just thinking that you seem very at home in this wilderness." Isaac glanced up then, a half-smile playing at his lips. "Is that a polite way of calling me uncivilized?" "Not at all," Lillian replied honestly. "It's admirable, actually. Most people merely exist in their surroundings." "You seem to understand yours." Isaac considered this, turning the small piece of wood in his hands. "The wilderness is honest. It doesn't pretend to be anything other than what it is, beautiful and brutal in equal measure. I respect that." "Is that why you've never settled in one place?" "Because you prefer the honesty of wilderness to the complications of civilization." Isaac's fingers stilled on the wood. "Partly," he admitted. "And partly because I haven't found a reason compelling enough to stay anywhere." Their eyes met across the fire, and something unspoken passed between them, a moment of recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits beneath their obvious differences. "Have you thought more about my offer?" Isaac asked, changing the subject. "About helping with your brother's ranch." Lillian nodded slowly. "I have, and I'm inclined to accept with conditions." "Name them." "First, everything is strictly business. You work for a fair share, as you suggested." Her green eyes held his steadily. "Second, I maintain final authority over all decisions regarding the ranch. It was my brother's legacy to me, and I won't cede control." Isaac nodded, unsurprised. "And third, our arrangement is temporary, 3 months. After that, we reassess." Isaac considered her terms, then extended his hand across the fire. "Agreed." Lillian hesitated only briefly before taking his hand. His palm was rough with calluses, warm and enveloping around her smaller hand. The contact sent an unexpected shiver up her arm. "Partners, then," she said, withdrawing her hand perhaps too quickly. "Partners?" Isaac echoed, a smile crinkling the corners of his eyes. The next day brought them to rockier terrain, the trail winding through narrow passes where the horses picked their way carefully over loose shale. By mid-afternoon, rain clouds gathered on the horizon, and the air grew heavy with impending moisture. "We should find shelter," Isaac said, eyeing the darkening sky. "Flash floods are common in these canyons." They pushed on, searching for suitable refuge when the sound of gunfire echoed through the rocky corridors. Isaac immediately drew his rifle, signaling for Lillian to stay behind him. "Wait here," he instructed, dismounting. "I'm coming with you," Lillian insisted, drawing her derringer. Isaac looked like he wanted to argue but nodded curtly. "Stay close, and keep that little popgun ready." They crept forward on foot, leading their horses until they could peer around a bend in the canyon. Ahead, a stagecoach stood at an angle across the trail, one wheel clearly broken. 3 men wearing bandanas over their faces were engaged in a firefight with someone inside the coach. "Road agents," Isaac whispered. "They picked a good spot for an ambush." "We have to help," Lillian said, gripping her small pistol tighter. Isaac assessed the situation with the practiced eye of a veteran. "I'll circle around to the right, try to get behind them. You stay here with the horses." Before Lillian could protest, a bullet whizzed past them, chipping stone from the canyon wall. "They've spotted us," Isaac muttered, pulling Lillian behind a boulder as more shots rang out. "Change of plan. Can you shoot that derringer accurately?" "At close range," Lillian confirmed. "Good, I'm going to draw their fire. When they focus on me, you work your way closer to the stage. There's a passenger inside who might be wounded. Get to them if you can." Lillian nodded, her heart pounding but her hands steady. Isaac squeezed her shoulder once, then darted out from behind the boulder, firing his rifle as he moved to a new position. Two of the bandits immediately turned their attention to this new threat, bullets kicking up dust at his heels. Lillian seized her opportunity, crouching low as she made her way from rock to rock, drawing closer to the stagecoach. The third bandit remained focused on the coach, unaware of her approach until she was within 15 feet. When he finally spotted her, Lillian didn't hesitate. She fired her derringer, the small gun bucking in her hand. The bullet caught the man in the shoulder, spinning him around. He dropped his gun with a howl of pain. The distraction was enough for Isaac to take aim at one of the other bandits, his shot finding its mark with deadly precision. The remaining outlaw, seeing his companions down, fled on horseback, disappearing around a bend in the canyon. "Are you hurt?" Isaac called to Lillian as he approached, scanning for any remaining threats. "I'm fine," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. They hurried to the stagecoach where an elderly man peered cautiously out the window, a smoking shotgun in his hands. "Are they gone?" the old man demanded. "One ran off, the other two won't be troubling anyone," Isaac assured him. "Anyone else in there with you?" "Just my granddaughter," the man said, opening the door. "She's hit." Inside the coach, a young woman no more than 16 lay across the seat, her dress stained with blood from a wound in her upper arm. "Let me see," Lillian said, climbing into the coach. She gently examined the girl, who whimpered at her touch. The bullet went clean through. "She needs the wound cleaned and bandaged properly, but she should recover." Isaac nodded. "We need to get off this trail before that last bandit brings friends, or before this storm breaks." He glanced at the broken wheel. "We can't move the coach, but we can move the passengers. Sir, can you ride?" The old man, who introduced himself as Jeremiah Sullivan, nodded grimly. "Been riding since before you were born, son." "Good, you'll take my horse. I'll put your granddaughter on Miss Harper's mare, and Miss Harper can ride with her to keep her steady. I'll ride the team leader." Within 20 minutes, they had transferred the Sullivans' most important belongings to the horses and were moving again, with Isaac leading them toward a line of cliffs where he knew of a cave that would provide shelter from the coming storm. They reached the cave just as the first heavy drops began to fall, the sky split by lightning that illuminated the landscape in harsh, white flashes. Inside, the space was larger than it appeared from outside, with a high ceiling and dry, sandy floor. Isaac quickly built a fire while Lillian tended to young Emma Sullivan's wound, cleaning it with whiskey from her grandfather's flask, and bandaging it with strips torn from her own petticoat. "You have a healer's touch," Jeremiah observed as Lillian worked. "My mother taught me," Lillian explained. "She believed women should know how to tend wounds as well as gardens." "Smart woman," the old man nodded approvingly. "Like my late wife, she could stitch a man up as neat as she could a quilt." Outside, the storm unleashed its fury, rain lashing the landscape and turning dry creek beds into raging torrents. Inside, the small group huddled around the fire, sharing the food they had between them. "We're headed to Promise Creek," Jeremiah told them as they ate. "My son has a store there. Emma's been living with me since her parents died, but it's time she had a proper home, proper schooling." "We're bound for Promise Creek as well," Lillian said. "I've inherited my brother's ranch there." "The Harper place," Jeremiah's bushy eyebrows rose. "That's good land." "Your brother was well respected. Sorry to hear of his passing." "Thank you," Lillian said softly. "Did you know him well?" "Well enough. Honest man, kept to himself mostly, but always willing to lend a hand when needed." The old man studied her face. "I can see the resemblance now. Same determined chin." Lillian smiled, warmed by this connection to the brother she hadn't seen in years. As the evening wore on, Emma's fever rose, causing Lillian and Isaac to exchange worried glances. Infection was setting in despite their best efforts. "She needs a doctor," Lillian whispered to Isaac as Jeremiah dozed fitfully beside his granddaughter. "Nearest one's in Promise Creek," Isaac replied grimly. 2 days' ride in good conditions. And in these conditions, Isaac glanced toward the cave entrance where rain still fell in sheets. 3, maybe 4, the canyons will be flooded. Lillian dampened her handkerchief with water from her canteen and placed it on Emma's forehead. "She may not have that long." Isaac ran a hand through his hair, thinking, "There's another option. There's a Navajo healer who lives about half a day's ride from here. Mountain Woman, they call her. She knows medicines the army doctors never heard of. Will she help us?" "She might," Isaac said. "I did her a good turn once, but reaching her means crossing Blue Canyon and if it's flooded." "We have to try," Lillian insisted, looking down at Emma's flushed face. "She's just a child." Isaac nodded, a new respect in his eyes. "First light, then. Try to get some rest. I'll take first watch." Lillian wanted to argue but knew he was right. She needed to conserve her strength for what lay ahead. She settled beside Emma, one hand resting lightly on the girl's arm, and closed her eyes. She woke to Isaac's gentle touch on her shoulder. Outside, the rain had slowed to a drizzle, and the first hints of dawn lightened the eastern sky. "Time to go," he murmured. "I've saddled the horses." They explained the plan to Jeremiah, who initially insisted on accompanying them but ultimately agreed to stay behind with Emma when Isaac pointed out that fewer riders meant faster travel. "I'm trusting you with my only grandchild," the old man said gruffly as they prepared to leave. "Don't make me regret it. We'll bring help back," Lillian promised, squeezing his weathered hand. The journey to Blue Canyon was arduous, the trail slippery with mud and occasionally blocked by debris washed down from higher ground. Isaac led them on a twisting path through rocky outcroppings, sometimes dismounting to check the stability of the ground ahead. Lillian found herself increasingly impressed by his woodcraft. He read the land like a book, finding safe passages where she would have seen only impassable terrain. They reached the edge of Blue Canyon by midday, and Isaac's expression grew grim as they gazed down at the churning water below. "The crossing's flooded," he confirmed. "We'll have to find another way." "Is there another way?" Lillian asked, brushing damp hair from her face. Isaac pointed north. "There's a natural bridge about 2 miles upstream. It's narrow, but it should hold." The natural bridge turned out to be a precarious-looking arch of stone spanning the canyon, barely wide enough for a horse to cross single file. Below, the floodwaters roared, brown and angry with debris. "I'll go first," Isaac said, dismounting. "Lead Samson slowly. If he balks, don't force him." Lillian watched with her heart in her throat as Isaac carefully led his horse onto the stone bridge. Samson snorted nervously but followed his master's lead, placing each hoof with deliberate care. When they reached the other side, Isaac waved for Lillian to follow. Taking a deep breath, Lillian dismounted and took Penny's reins, murmuring soothing words to the mare. The stone felt slick beneath her boots as she stepped onto the bridge, but she forced herself not to look down at the churning water below. They were halfway across when disaster struck. A massive log carried by the floodwaters slammed into the bridge's support, sending shudders through the stone arch. Penny reared in panic, nearly pulling Lillian off the bridge. "Hold on," Isaac shouted from the far side. "Don't let go of the reins." Lillian clung desperately to the leather straps as Penny danced sideways, her hooves perilously close to the edge. The stone beneath them groaned ominously. "Isaac!" Lillian cried as she felt the bridge shift. In an instant, Isaac was moving toward them, his expression focused and determined. He spoke to Penny in a low, commanding voice that somehow cut through the mare's panic. The horse stilled, trembling but no longer fighting. "That's it," Isaac encouraged, drawing closer. "Now back her up slowly. The bridge won't hold all 3 of us for long." Step by careful step, Lillian guided Penny backward toward the side they had come from, while Isaac retreated to his original position. When both were safely off the bridge, Lillian's knees finally buckled, and she sat down hard on the muddy ground, her whole body shaking. Isaac crossed back to her side, his own face pale beneath his tan. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, unable to speak for a moment. "The bridge won't last much longer," Isaac said, helping her to her feet. "We need another plan." Lillian stared at the crumbling stone arch, then at the raging water below. "Could we swim the horses across?" Isaac followed her gaze, calculating. "Not here. The current's too strong, but there's a wider spot about a mile downstream where the canyon broadens. The water will be shallower there with less force." "Then that's where we go," Lillian said firmly, remounting Penny. "Emma's counting on us." The determination in her voice seemed to spark something in Isaac's eyes, admiration, perhaps, or something deeper. He nodded once, then swung into his own saddle. The crossing point Isaac chose was indeed broader, the current visibly less violent, though still dangerous. They removed their boots and any unnecessary weight from the horses, securing everything in oilskin packages tied high on the saddles. "Stay upstream of me," Isaac instructed as they prepared to enter the water. "If you get into trouble, Samson and I will be between you and the worst of the current." Lillian nodded, her throat dry despite the moisture all around them. "Isaac," she said suddenly, catching his arm, "thank you." "For everything." His blue eyes held hers for a long moment. "Don't thank me yet. We still have a canyon to cross and a healer to find." The water was shockingly cold as they urged the horses forward. Penny balked at first, but Lillian's firm hands and gentle voice convinced the mare to continue. The water rose quickly, soon reaching the horses' shoulders, forcing them to swim. Lillian gasped as the cold current tugged at her legs, threatening to pull her from the saddle. She leaned forward, clinging to Penny's mane, her focus narrowed to the opposite bank that seemed impossibly far away. The horses fought the current valiantly, powerful muscles working against the flood's pull. Halfway across, disaster struck again. A submerged branch caught Penny's legs, causing the mare to lose her rhythm. The current immediately seized the opportunity, pulling horse and rider sideways. "Isaac!" Lillian cried as water washed over her. Isaac wheeled Samson around, fighting against the current to reach her. Their hands met, clasped, held as he pulled her and Penny back into the safer line of crossing. For several terrifying seconds, it seemed the current might claim them all. But then Samson's hooves found purchase on the rocky riverbed, and with a mighty effort he pulled them toward the shallows. When they finally staggered onto the opposite bank, both humans and horses were exhausted, soaked, and shivering. But they were alive, and the worst of the crossing was behind them. "That was too close," Isaac panted, helping Lillian wring water from her skirts. "But we made it," she replied, her teeth chattering. "Thanks to you." Isaac shook his head. "Thanks to all of us. You kept your head when most would have panicked." He busied himself retrieving their boots and other gear. "We should keep moving. The exercise will warm us, and Mountain Woman's lodge isn't far now." They rode in silence for the next hour, each lost in private thoughts as the landscape gradually changed from canyon country to pine forest. The air grew cooler as they climbed, but the exertion and the emerging sun helped dry their clothes and warm their bodies. Mountain Woman's dwelling appeared so suddenly that Lillian almost missed it, a stone and timber structure built into the side of a hill, nearly invisible against the surrounding forest. Smoke rose from a hole in the roof, the only obvious sign of habitation. Isaac dismounted and approached the dwelling respectfully, stopping several yards away. "Mountain Woman," he called in a clear voice, "I seek your wisdom and healing." For a long moment there was no response. Then the hide covering the doorway was pushed aside, and a woman emerged, small in stature, but straight-backed despite her evident age. Her dark eyes were sharp in a face mapped with deep lines, her silver hair braided and wrapped around her head like a crown. She studied Isaac without speaking, then shifted her penetrating gaze to Lillian. "I know you rides like thunder," she finally said to Isaac in accented English. You saved my grandson from the soldiers. Isaac nodded. 3 summers passed. Why do you come now? A child lies sick with fever from a bullet wound, Isaac explained. The infection grows stronger while she grows weaker. We seek your healing knowledge. Mountain Woman considered this, her gaze still moving between them. And this woman, who is she to you? Isaac glanced at Lillian, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. She is a friend, one who risked much to bring help to the child. The old woman nodded slowly, seeming to find this answer satisfactory. Come, tell me more of this wound while I prepare what is needed. Inside, the dwelling was surprisingly spacious and meticulously organized. Bundles of dried herbs hung from the ceiling beams, and various pots bubbled over a central fire pit. The air was fragrant with unfamiliar spices and medicines. Mountain Woman listened intently as they described Emma's wound and symptoms. She worked as they talked, selecting herbs from different bundles and grinding them with a stone mortar and pestle. The child has the fire in her blood, she said when they finished. This medicine will cool the fire, but it must be given within the turning of the sun, or it will be too late. She wrapped the prepared medicines in leaves, then in a square of soft hide, securing the bundle with sinew. Keep this dry, she instructed, handing it to Lillian. When you reach the child, brew it as you would tea, but let it steep until the water turns green. She must drink all of it. Thank you, Lillian said, carefully stowing the precious package. What can we offer in return? Mountain Woman's weathered face creased in what might have been a smile. Rides like thunder paid his debt when he saved my grandson, but you, she studied Lillian intently. You will return when the snow falls, bringing cloth for winter garments, blue cloth like your eyes. I will, Lillian promised, although she wondered at the specificity of the request. As they prepared to leave, Mountain Woman pulled Isaac aside, speaking to him in a low voice. Lillian couldn't hear the words, but she saw Isaac's expression change from surprise to thoughtfulness. What did she say to you? Lillian asked as they rode away. Isaac hesitated, then gave a small shrug. She said, I've been wandering too long, that sometimes what we seek has been seeking us as well. What does that mean? I'm not entirely sure, Isaac admitted, though something in his tone suggested otherwise. They pushed hard on the return journey, finding an easier crossing point that, while adding miles to their trip, avoided the dangerous flood waters. By the time they reached the cave where they had left the Sullivans, the sun was setting on the following day. Jeremiah met them outside, his face haggard with worry. She's worse, he said without preamble. Been delirious since noon. Inside, Emma lay pale and still, her breathing shallow, her forehead burning with fever. Lillian immediately set about brewing the medicine while Isaac explained to Jeremiah what Mountain Woman had told them. Indian medicine, the old man muttered skeptically. You sure about this? I've seen her heal wounds that army doctors would have amputated, Isaac replied firmly. If anyone can help Emma now, it's Mountain Woman. Getting the bitter-smelling medicine into the semi-conscious girl proved challenging, but between Lillian's gentle persistence and Jeremiah's coaxing, they managed to get her to swallow the entire brew. Then there was nothing to do but wait. The night passed slowly, with all 3 adults taking turns sitting with Emma, bathing her face with cool water and speaking softly to her when she stirred restlessly. Near dawn, Lillian was at her post when she noticed a change. Emma's breathing had deepened, and her skin felt cooler to the touch. I think her fever's breaking, she whispered to Isaac, who had come to check on them. By mid-morning, the improvement was undeniable. Emma's fever had dropped significantly, and she was able to take sips of water and broth. The angry red lines that had been spreading from her wound had receded, and the flesh around the bullet hole looked less inflamed. It's working, Jeremiah said wonderingly, tears gathering in his rheumy eyes as he clasped his granddaughter's hand. By God, it's working. They remained at the cave for 2 more days, allowing Emma to regain enough strength for travel. During this time, Lillian observed a subtle shift in her relationship with Isaac. Their shared ordeal had forged a connection that transcended their initial wariness, creating a comfortable intimacy that manifested in small ways: the brush of hands when passing objects, exchanged glances that conveyed unspoken understanding, the way they gravitated toward each other around the fire in the evenings. On the morning they were to depart, Lillian found Isaac outside the cave, watching the sunrise paint the desert landscape in gold and crimson. "It's beautiful," she said, coming to stand beside him. "It is," he agreed, though when she glanced up, she found him looking at her rather than the horizon. "You're different from any woman I've known, Lillian Harper." It was the first time he had used her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice sent a pleasant shiver through her. "How so?" she asked, suddenly breathless. "Most women I've encountered either fear the wilderness or endure it. You embrace it. You face challenges head-on without complaint or hesitation." His blue eyes held her steadily. "It's rare and admirable." Lillian felt warmth rise to her cheeks. "My mother always said true strength isn't about never feeling fear, it's about feeling it and moving forward anyway." "Your mother was a wise woman," Isaac smiled. "You honor her memory well." Before Lillian could respond, Jeremiah called from inside the cave, announcing that Emma was awake and asking for breakfast. The moment dissolved, but the warmth it had kindled in Lillian's chest remained. They set out later that morning, with Emma riding double with Lillian while Jeremiah rode Samson and Isaac walked, leading the way. Their progress was necessarily slow to accommodate Emma's condition, but the weather remained fair, and the mood among the travelers was optimistic. That evening, as they made camp beneath a stand of cottonwoods, Emma approached Lillian, who was preparing their simple supper. "Grandpa says you saved my life," the girl said shyly. "You and Mr. Blackwood," Lillian smiled at her. "We helped, but the real credit goes to a wise healer and your own strength." Emma sat beside her, watching as she stirred the pot of beans. "Grandpa also says you're taking over your brother's ranch, is that true?" "It is," Lillian confirmed, "though I have much to learn about ranching." "Will you stay in Promise Creek?" Emma asked. "For good, I mean." Lillian considered the question. 2 weeks ago, she would have said her future was uncertain, that the ranch was simply an inheritance to be assessed and possibly sold. Now, after experiencing the vastness of the territory, the challenges and beauty of this wild land, she found herself unexpectedly drawn to the prospect of building a life here. "I believe I will," she said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. Emma smiled. "Good. Promise Creek needs more women like you. Most of the ladies there are so concerned with being proper, they've forgotten how to be brave." From across the campfire, Isaac caught Lillian's eye and smiled, as if he had overheard and approved of her decision. The look they exchanged held possibilities neither was ready to name, but both were beginning to acknowledge. The next day brought them to more familiar territory, and by late afternoon, they could see smoke rising from chimneys in the distance. Promise Creek at last. As they crested the final hill overlooking the town, Lillian reined in Penny, taking a moment to absorb the view. Promise Creek was larger than she had expected, with several dozen buildings arranged along a main street, and homes and small farms scattered across the surrounding valley. A creek, swollen with recent rains but contained within its banks, curved around the eastern edge of the settlement. "Welcome to your new home, Miss Harper," Isaac said, coming to stand beside her horse. "It's beautiful," Lillian murmured, feeling a surprising sense of rightness as she gazed down at the town where her brother had made his life. Jeremiah pointed to a 2-story building on the main street. "That's my son's store. He'll be pleased to see Emma's recovered." "And my brother's ranch?" Lillian asked. "Where is it from here?" Isaac gestured to the northwest, where the valley narrowed between 2 sloping hills. "About 3 miles that way. Good land with natural boundaries, the creek on one side, foothills on the other." They rode into town as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains. Their arrival created something of a stir. Dusty, travel-worn, and accompanied by the Sullivan girl who had been reported missing after the stagecoach failed to arrive on schedule. Word spread quickly, and by the time they reached the Sullivan store, a small crowd had gathered. Emma was swept into her father's emotional embrace, while Jeremiah explained their ordeal in colorful terms that, Lillian noted with amusement, cast himself in an increasingly heroic light with each retelling. The town doctor, a serious man named Peterson, examined Emma's wound and pronounced her healing well, though he seemed skeptical about the Indian remedy that had saved her life. Whatever it was, it worked, he admitted grudgingly. The infection's clearing nicely. Keep the wound clean, and she should make a full recovery. As the excitement died down, Lillian found herself suddenly at a crossroads. The lawyer who managed her brother's affairs wouldn't be available until morning, leaving her uncertain where to spend the night. "You're welcome to stay with us," Emma's father offered. "We have a spare room above the store." Before Lillian could respond, Isaac stepped forward. "If you don't mind, Mr. Sullivan, I think Miss Harper might prefer to see her brother's property before dark." "There's still enough daylight if we ride now." He turned to Lillian. "The house should be habitable, and I can ensure everything's secure before leaving you to settle in." Lillian recognized the consideration behind his offer, a chance to connect with her brother's legacy in privacy, rather than spending her first night in town answering the curious questions of strangers. "I'd like that," she said gratefully. "Thank you, Mr. Sullivan, for your kind offer, but I'm eager to see my brother's home." After promising to return to town the following day to meet with the lawyer and check on Emma, Lillian and Isaac rode out, leaving the bustle of Promise Creek behind. As they followed the well-worn trail toward the Harper Ranch, Lillian felt a curious mixture of anticipation and apprehension. "What if I'm not suited to this life?" she asked suddenly, voicing the doubt that had been nagging at her. Running a ranch is so different from teaching young ladies about literature and comportment. Isaac considered her question seriously. Ranching is hard work, there's no denying that, but so is molding young minds, I imagine. The skills may be different, but the character needed is the same: determination, adaptability, willingness to learn. He glanced at her with a smile. "You've demonstrated all those qualities in abundance since we met." His confidence in her abilities warmed Lillian more than she cared to admit. "You've been very kind to help me, Isaac. I'm not sure I would have made it this far without you." "You would have," he said with certainty, "though perhaps with a few more scrapes and bruises." They rounded a bend in the trail, and suddenly the Harper Ranch came into view, a sturdy log house with a broad porch, a large barn, and several outbuildings, all situated on a gentle slope overlooking a verdant valley where a small herd of cattle grazed in the distance. Lillian reined Penny to a stop, her throat tight with emotion. "It's just as he described it in his letters," she whispered. "A place where the sky meets the earth in perfect harmony." Isaac dismounted and came to help her down from her horse, his hands strong and steady at her waist. "Your brother built something good here, something that can last." Inside, the house was simple but well crafted, with 3 rooms downstairs, a kitchen, a sitting room, and what had been Lucas's bedroom and a loft above. Everything was dusty from weeks of vacancy, but otherwise in good order. While Isaac checked the outbuildings and tended to the horses, Lillian moved through the rooms, touching her brother's possessions, feeling his presence in the books on the shelves, the hand-carved furniture, the careful arrangement of the kitchen tools. She found herself both mourning his loss anew and celebrating his achievement. By the time Isaac returned, she had swept the kitchen and started a fire in the stove using wood from the well-stocked pile by the back door. "Everything looks sound," Isaac reported. "The barn needs some minor repairs, but nothing urgent, and you have about 30 head of cattle in the valley, all healthy from what I could see." 30, Lillian repeated, surprised. Lucas's last letter mentioned 50. Isaac frowned. "Could be some strayed while the place was unattended." "We can ride out tomorrow and check the boundaries, see if any are in the back pastures." The casual we didn't escape Lillian's notice, nor did the way it made her feel supported rather than encroached upon. Their partnership, born of necessity just days ago, already felt natural and right. As darkness fell, they shared a simple meal of beans and bacon at the kitchen table, discussing practical matters for the ranch's operation. Isaac's knowledge was extensive, and he explained everything clearly without being condescending, respecting Lillian's intelligence even as he acknowledged her inexperience. "You'll need to hire at least one more hand," he advised as they finished eating. "Two would be better. Cattle need constant attention, especially during calving season." "Would you help me find suitable men?" Lillian asked. "I wouldn't know how to judge their qualifications." "Of course," Isaac agreed readily. "There are usually experienced hands looking for work in a town like Promise Creek." As the evening deepened, a comfortable silence fell between them. Isaac rose to his feet, reaching for his hat. "I should head back to town, find a room at the boarding house." Lillian stood as well, suddenly reluctant to see him go. "You could stay," she offered before she could reconsider. "In the barn, I mean. It seems foolish for you to ride all the way back when you'll just return in the morning." Isaac studied her face, his expression unreadable. "Are you sure? People might talk." "Let them," Lillian said with a dismissive wave. "We've spent several nights in the wilderness together already. One more night with a solid barn between us hardly seems scandalous in comparison." A smile tugged at the corner of Isaac's mouth. "When you put it that way, Miss Harper, I accept your gracious offer." Lillian walked him to the door where he paused, turning back to face her. In the lamplight, his features were softened, the usual guardedness in his blue eyes replaced by something warmer. "Lillian," he said quietly, "I want you to know that whatever happens, helping you these past days has been my privilege." Before she could respond, he tipped his hat and stepped out into the night, leaving her with a curious fluttering in her chest, and the sense that something significant had shifted between them. Morning brought a flurry of activity. After a quick breakfast, they rode into town where Lillian met with Mr. Hollister, the lawyer who had handled Lucas's affairs. The meeting confirmed what she already knew: the ranch was hers free and clear, along with a modest sum in the bank that would cover immediate expenses. "Your brother was well respected in these parts," Hollister told her as he handed over the deed and other papers. "Built that place up from nothing through hard work and fair dealing. Folks will be watching to see if you measure up." "I intend to," Lillian replied with quiet determination. Their next stop was the general store, where they purchased supplies and where Lillian was introduced to several townspeople, including the mayor, the banker, and the editor of the local newspaper. All were politely curious about the schoolteacher from St. Louis, who had inherited the Harper Ranch, their interest barely concealing their skepticism about her ability to manage such an enterprise. "Don't mind them," Isaac murmured as they left the store. "They'll change their tune once they see what you're capable of." Their final stop was the saloon, not for drinks, but because it was the best place to find ranch hands looking for work. Isaac handled the inquiries while Lillian observed from a table near the door, conscious of being the only woman in the establishment. By mid-afternoon, Isaac had identified two promising candidates: a middle-aged man named Pete Wilson, who had worked cattle all his life, and a younger hand called Tom Riley, who had experience with both horses and cattle. "They're both solid men," Isaac assured her as they rode back to the ranch. "Wilson's got a bad knee that keeps him from some of the more demanding outfits, but his knowledge is worth twice a younger man's strength. Riley's eager to prove himself and willing to learn." Lillian trusted his judgment, and the arrangements were made for both men to start work the following Monday, giving her the weekend to settle in and prepare. The next few days passed in a whirlwind of activity. Isaac showed Lillian the boundaries of the property, taught her the basics of cattle management, and helped her plan improvements to the ranch. They repaired fences, cleaned out the barn, and located most of the missing cattle in a far pasture, bringing the herd count back to 48. In the evenings, They would sit on the porch, watching the sunset paint the western sky in spectacular colors while discussing the day's accomplishments and the next day's plans. These quiet moments became precious to Lillian, a time when conversation flowed easily between them, sometimes serious, sometimes punctuated by laughter. On Sunday evening, with Wilson and Riley due to arrive the next morning, a subtle tension descended as they sat in their accustomed places on the porch steps. "Everything's ready," Isaac said, breaking a lengthy silence. "You're well prepared to take charge tomorrow." Lillian nodded, hearing the unspoken message in his words. With the ranch hands hired and the most urgent work completed, his commitment to help her get established was technically fulfilled. "You're planning to move on," she said, not a question but a statement. Isaac was quiet for a long moment. "That was always the arrangement." "Yes," Lillian agreed, trying to keep the disappointment from her voice. 3 months, we said, but it's barely been 2 weeks. "The circumstances changed," Isaac pointed out. "You have experienced hands coming tomorrow. The ranch is in good order." "You don't need me anymore." The words hung between them, laden with meaning beyond their surface simplicity. "Is that what you think?" Lillian asked softly, turning to look at him directly. "That I don't need you?" Isaac met her gaze, something vulnerable flickering in his blue eyes. "What I think," he said carefully, "is that you're fully capable of running this ranch on your own. What I wonder is whether you might want me to stay anyway." Lillian's heart quickened. "And if I did, then I would need to be clear about my intentions," Isaac replied, his voice deepening. "Because staying would mean something different than our original agreement." "What would it mean?" Lillian asked, though she thought she knew the answer, could see it in the way he looked at her now. Instead of replying with words, Isaac reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, and touched her cheek with gentle fingers. "It would mean I've found something I never expected to find. Someone who makes me want to stop wandering." Lillian leaned into his touch, her eyes never leaving his. "I've never met anyone like you, Isaac Blackwood. You've shown me a strength in myself I didn't know I possessed, and a world more vibrant than I ever imagined." She placed her hand over his. "I don't just want you to stay. I need you to stay not because I can't manage without you, but because I don't want to." The confession hung in the air between them, honest and vulnerable. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then Isaac leaned forward, closing the distance between them to press his lips gently against hers. The kiss was tentative at first, a question rather than a demand. When Lillian responded, sliding her hand to the back of his neck, the kiss deepened, becoming an answer, a promise, a beginning. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Isaac rested his forehead against hers. "I should have done that the day you pointed that little derringer at those outlaws," he murmured. "I knew then you were something special." Lillian laughed softly. "And I should have done it when you risked your life to get medicine for Emma. That's when I knew you were more than just a wandering cowboy." They remained on the porch long into the evening, talking about possibilities, about the future, about building something together that neither had dared hope for before. And when Isaac finally departed for the barn, it was with the understanding that his days of wandering were over. The arrival of Wilson and Riley the next morning marked the beginning of a new chapter for the Harper Ranch. Both men were initially surprised to find themselves working for a woman, but Lillian's clear-eyed competence and willingness to learn quickly earned their respect. Isaac's presence helped smooth the transition, his obvious regard for Lillian setting an example the others naturally followed. As spring turned to summer, the ranch flourished under their combined efforts. Lillian proved to have a natural head for business, making smart decisions about which cattle to sell and which to keep for breeding. Isaac's experience with the land and animals complemented her administrative skills perfectly, creating a partnership that benefited the entire operation. Their personal relationship deepened alongside their professional one. Isaac moved from the barn to a small cabin on the property close enough for convenience but separate enough to maintain propriety. They took their meals together, worked side by side during the day, and spent their evenings planning for the ranch's future. By midsummer, their growing attachment was obvious to everyone in Promise Creek. The initial skepticism about the schoolteacher from St. Louis had given way to genuine respect, particularly after Lillian organized the town's first successful cattle auction, bringing buyers from as far as Denver. On a warm August evening, exactly 3 months after they had first met in Rattlesnake Gulch, Isaac asked Lillian to ride with him to a special spot he had discovered on the property, a small mesa overlooking the entire valley, where wildflowers grew in profusion despite the summer heat. As the sun began to set, painting the landscape in gold and amber, Isaac took Lillian's hands in his. "3 months ago, I made you a promise," he said, his voice deep with emotion. "I said I would help you establish yourself here, then we would reassess our arrangement." Lillian squeezed his hands. "I remember. I've been thinking about that reassessment," Isaac continued, "about what I want for my future, for our future if you'll have me." From his pocket, he withdrew a small object that caught the fading sunlight, a ring, simple but beautifully crafted, with a small diamond set between 2 sapphires. "Lillian Harper," Isaac said, dropping to one knee before her, "I've wandered most of my life, never finding a place that felt like home until I found you. You're the bravest, most determined woman I've ever known, and I love you more than I thought possible." He held up the ring. "Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" Tears welled in Lillian's eyes, but her smile was radiant. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, Isaac Blackwood, I will marry you." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose to take her in his arms, Lillian thought of the day they met, of a derringer in her hand and defiance in her heart, of his calm voice saying, "I'd rather see you smile than bleed today." She was smiling now, truly smiling, with a happiness that came from finding not just a home or a purpose, but a partner who valued her strength as much as her softness, who saw her completely and loved what he saw. Their wedding took place in October, when the aspens had turned to gold and the air carried the first hint of winter's approach. The whole town turned out for the occasion, along with Jeremiah and Emma Sullivan, who had become dear friends. Mountain Woman made the journey as well, accepting the bolt of blue cloth Lillian had promised her with a knowing smile that suggested she had foreseen this outcome from the beginning. "Sometimes," the old healer told Lillian as they stood apart from the celebration, "the heart finds its true path even when the head is determined to wander. Rides like thunder needed someone to fight beside, not someone to protect. You gave him that gift." As the years passed, the Harper Blackwood Ranch prospered, expanding its operations and becoming one of the most successful in the territory. Isaac and Lillian worked as true partners, each contributing their unique strengths to the enterprise they built together. Their first child, a daughter they named Sarah after Lillian's mother, arrived the following summer, with a son, Michael, joining the family 2 years later. Both children grew up strong and capable, learning both the practical skills of ranching from their father and the value of education and independent thinking from their mother. On the 10th anniversary of their meeting, Isaac surprised Lillian by taking her back to Rattlesnake Gulch, to the very spot where they had first encountered each other. The abandoned mining shed was more dilapidated now, half collapsed from years of neglect, but the view of the desert remained as breathtaking as ever. "Do you ever regret it?" Isaac asked as they sat together on a sun-warmed boulder. "Giving up your teaching position in St. Louis for this wild country?" Lillian leaned against his shoulder, considering the question. "Not for a moment," she said truthfully. "I was existing there, not living. Here I've found purpose, adventure, and love." She turned to face him, her green eyes as bright and determined as the day they met. "And you, do you ever miss your wandering days?" Isaac's laugh was warm as he pulled her closer. "How could I miss wandering when I've found my home?" He brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch still sending a pleasant shiver through her after all these years. "Besides, life with you has never lacked for adventure." As the sun began its descent behind the distant mountains, painting the landscape in the same golden hues that had illuminated their first meeting. Isaac leaned down to kiss his wife, a kiss that held the memory of that first embrace on her brother's porch, the passion of their wedding night, and the deep, abiding love that had only strengthened with each passing year. "I'd still rather see you smile than fight," he murmured against her lips. Lillian's answering smile was radiant. "With you by my side, Isaac Blackwood, I can do both." And as they mounted their horses to return to the home and family they had built together, Lillian reflected that sometimes the greatest adventures weren't found in wandering, but in having the courage to stand your ground and the wisdom to recognize when that ground had become exactly where you were meant to be all along.